Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to a live stream here on Forgotten Weapons. We are celebrating the end of the Kickstarter campaign for Mr. Jonathan Ferguson's book, Thorneycroft SA80 British Bullpup Firearms, which is really cool. We hit, we weren't sure this morning if we were going to hit the actual. Let's see. I can't watch that myself, or I get feedback on it. We weren't sure first thing this morning if we were going to hit the 550 goal to do the Kickstarter, and it started moving. And I figured, you know what, we should probably do it anyway. Like, we're so close, and it turns out we hit it like half an hour before this was scheduled to start. So we have, oops, he's on that side. We have grabbed Jonathan. We have rousted him out of bed at an unfortunate 3 a.m. local time. Sorry about that, Jonathan. We should have thought of this a little more carefully before we scheduled it, I suppose. We can't reschedule it because the end of the Kickstarter is in exactly 1 hour and 59 minutes from now. So you do appear to be mostly awake. I see you've got some tea. That should help.
Yeah, that will definitely help. Yeah, I've got some tea in my Browning High Power mug, which I don't use very often, so special occasion. I'm staying off the booze because otherwise I really will fall asleep. Because you didn't get me out of bed. I haven't been to bed, so I'm not going to get to bed until 5.
Oh,
well,
my goodness.
Gone 5.
Alrighty then.
But still happy to be here.
Fantastic. I would hope so. The book has done phenomenally well.
It has, yeah.
I have to say, it's gone beyond what I was trying to rather conservatively. I didn't want to get my hopes up too high. But no, it's blown past where I kind of thought it would be. Let's see. Let me check some microphone levels here. All right. Let's see if we can fix this a little bit. All right. Crack me up. That's about as loud as my microphone is getting.
You're okay for me.
Okay, good. And you're coming through just fine for me.
Good.
So, comments say that Jonathan is clear, although there is a slight delay in that. All right. Let's see, maybe if there we go. Let's see if that changes anything for people. Anyway, so basically our job is to chat about how cool British bullpups are for about 2 hours. We can take some questions from the audience here. Let's see. Now I haven't.
If only someone would write a book about them, we wouldn't have to talk about them.
So what actually got you the idea to write the book? Where did it come from? I mean, I know you work like in the place that has all of these guns, but was there more than that?
Yeah, we have a few, don't we? In fact, I think Nick took some nice photos down the racks so that we can show people the spread of the collection there. Yeah, I don't know. Well, it depends. It depends whether we start with where the book idea came from or where my interest in bullpups came from. Why don't we do both? So the book actually came from a collaboration that you and I did through Ares. So we were both doing work for them at that time, or I was, and you were doing your thing. And you did a great series of videos on all sorts of different guns, including some cool bullpups, SA80s, SA80 prototypes, EM2, EM1. And I wrote some blog posts to go along with that. And someone said, why don't we write a book? So I did. And so I think if you add up the original blog posts, it was something like 30-some thousand words. And we're at, 135,000 in the current draft. So, yeah, kind of small acorns. And then very briefly, because I don't want to bore people to death, but obviously I have a pretty strong interest in firearms and British firearms in particular, military firearms in particular. And I think one of the first books I ever read on firearms was an Ian Hogg book, which other people would have picked up at some point. Belonged to my dad, and it had this 80s style dust jacket with artwork on it. And I'm pretty sure the EM2 was on the dust jacket, and if not, it was like a double page spread in there. And I thought, that's really cool. One day I want to hold one of those. So I've since held several.
Yes, I'm sure you have. I think, sorry, while you were talking, we were getting a bunch of reports that it's echoing quite a bit, and I think I've fixed it. I think I have it fixed.
Is that your end or mine?
My end, apparently.
Oh, okay.
So there is a delay, however, so we need to wait a minute and see if, okay. All right, I think we're good. I think we're good. I tried to turn up the volume and instead I got a ton of echo, but
right.
Okay. All right. We're good. So anyway, it's very, not that I want to take credit for the book, but it's cool that I got to take credit for the book.
Well, yeah, you're inspiring all sorts of things in the gun world. So this
Honestly,
is one of them.
I hope we can inspire a lot of other people who are in positions like yours to write some books. There are a ton of people who have a tremendous amount of knowledge and access to materials and guns and records. And It's a shame that more people aren't writing. So hopefully,
I know,
can give people the opportunity to do it.
That's the thing. It's the opportunity, or almost the excuse, really. When, especially like me, if you have first world problems, but if you have a day job that involves what you love, it doesn't mean to say that you get to pick and choose what you want to research, and if you do, what you actually want to write about. So to be able to go, look, here's this thing that's worth me doing. Can I set aside time in the day to write it? Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's such a big deal. People go through whole careers setting aside projects because they haven't got time, or we'll do it in a few years, or I'll do it when I retire. And people don't write stuff down. So much knowledge was lost from the old patent room because the curators, the custodians, either didn't find time or maybe thought if they did write it down, they'd be replaced. Well, I don't have that fear, to be honest. So I'm going to write down as much as I can, hopefully.
Fantastic. We had a question for someone who says, who owns the copyright or intellectual property on older British firearms?
Oh.
Which sounds to me like a question that's not, I don't think that's the question one needs to ask. Is there such a thing as owning the IP to these things?
We think there may be. This does come up. Usually when someone says, I want to make an L1A1, give me all the drawings. And we go, actually, that's probably is that a bad example? Anyway, in theory, there is inherent design copyright, I believe, in something like a firearm. And I forget the details of when it expires and all that kind of thing. But I think we've given out detailed stuff for like Lee Enfield, but not for the SLR. It's not actually my area, hence the vague response. We have our archivist looks after copyright and IP. So I don't really know, but there are concerns over that. But the fact that it isn't a huge issue is probably evident from the video game world, where they consult their lawyers and they will change the names, but they won't actually change. Well, I say that. Sometimes they change the likeness a bit, don't they? The new Modern Warfare game did that.
It doesn't seem to be that big a deal.
No, and I don't think it's done for that reason. I think it's done because they weren't paying attention to the reference photos, or they just thought, who cares?
There's actually a lawsuit going through fairly recently. I don't know if it's even resolved yet, on a game that used the Humvee and got sued by GM. And
really?
Last I heard, it was looking like they were going to be allowed to use it, which could change some of this stuff.
Yeah, I know.
So cool.
Boeing went after EA, I guess, years ago for the vehicles depicted in Battlefield. That clearly went nowhere.
Yeah. So, all right, you've got tea. I need to have something to drink here, especially if I'm going to be talking. So, I mentioned this to you briefly. I have a homemade sausage roll to have some sort of vaguely British-like.
This thing is nuts.
So we had a pizza for dinner, and my wife held off part of the pizza crust and made it into a ginormous sausage roll. So I'm gonna just cut some slices of that to snack on. And then I was trying to figure out, like, what's an appropriate British drink? And I have three possibilities here that we can go through. One is hard cider.
Hard cider.
Okay.
The only cider.
Well, absolutely true. Number two is Scotch, but most of the guns you're talking about are English more than.
Well,
I guess Thorneycroft had some Scottish connections, didn't he?
Thorneycroft and Farker. Thorneycroft had connections, and Farker. No, sorry, yeah, they're both English, but they have Scottish connections. Lived in Scotland, worked in Scotland, and hey, it was the UK, so technically they're all British.
And the third one is gin and tonic.
Yep.
And with gin and tonic, I have two possibilities. I have Plymouth, maybe strength, which is kind of my favorite go-to. And I got this on vacation out of the Orkney Isles.
Nice.
And it's a very interesting one. So I think I'm actually going to try this. I don't have very much of it, so I've kind of been hoarding it, lest I use it up, and then I don't have any of it. So.
Well, I forgot to grab any beer from the garage, so I might have to go and grab one later.
We'll allow it. All right.
Right now, caffeine is more important.
I would imagine, yes. We can't lose you at like 8 minutes into the live stream here.
I did think of doing the old heist movie thing of like splicing in me just kind of doing this.
Just a still frame. It's weird. He doesn't talk the whole stream. All right. Follow-up question from someone. Are there any manufacturing processes used in EM2 that simply aren't done anymore? I think someone is getting at the idea of, could this be remanufactured today, or is there some mysterious lost art to the EM2?
I keep seeing comments about making repros, and I think anyone who's watched in-range videos, or Forgotten Weapons videos for that matter, should know the answer really. But I share the sentiment. I would love to see someone make an EM2.
There's a fantastic track record of people making reproduction videos. It never goes wrong. Not ever.
Almost never. Well, the one that springs to mind would be walnut veneer.
Okay.
I mean, walnut veneer is clearly still done, but over the sort of compound curves of an EM2 receiver, I don't know. I don't actually know the details of how they achieved that. I know how they stuck it on, and I don't know I don't think you have this in the US, but it was equivalent would be JB Weld. It was Araldite. It was a trademarked adhesive, epoxy 2-part adhesive called Araldite, and they still make that. We use it for hobby stuff and DIY over here still, which is, I think, interesting in itself.
Yeah.
But so gluing it on was, neither here nor there. But how you actually get it fitted to the receiver, I don't know. That's beyond my expertise.
Well, if we were to do the modernized EM2, it would be linoleum. And that
do you have Formica over
there? Somehow, yes.
Yeah,
I don't really know.
That's still quite fit. That'd be like the 60s version of the EM2. No, of course, what we would do is something that we've spoken about, which would be a modernized form with polymer furniture on it. So, which we know how to do. So,
shall I spill the secret thing that was gonna be really cool, but just kind of fizzled and didn't happen?
Did it fizzle? Did it fizzle entirely?
Yeah, it pretty well fizzled.
Shame.
So
go on then.
We were talking to someone at Magpul, and the idea came up of, what if Magpul did a modernized EM2? And there was, for a brief, glorious moment, there was a possibility of having like a full CAD rendering of a modernized, Magpul'd out EM2. And we were going to do that as a poster. But it such things sometimes happen and sometimes don't, and it just didn't quite happen.
Yeah, I was still holding out hope for that one.
That would have been really cool.
Kind of had mixed feelings.
It's a little bit of blasphemy.
Sacrilege, but awesome at the same time. But yeah, as to manufacturing processes, I mean, it's casting, machining, black paint over the top when you're finished, phosphating underneath, we think. So nothing. The only thing that isn't done now is the wooden veneer.
I think there are a lot of operations in there that were broaching.
Fair point. Yeah.
And there are things that are still can be done today, but nobody does them because there are way more efficient ways to do the same sort of work. So it'd be interesting.
We'd just CNC it, wouldn't we?
It'd be interesting to know how much of that receiver could be effectively CNC'd. Because one of the things with broaching is you can use this really long tool to broach out the inside of something like a receiver in a way that, if you need an end mill that's a foot long on a CNC machine, that just doesn't really work. It's not like it's some mystical lost art we don't know how to do. It's just not physically a good use for that tool.
Sure. So you'd probably need a redesign. You
might, yeah. But it could be something like the classic way that people fix a lot of that sort of stuff for replicas is you slice the receiver in half lengthwise and you just mill out both sides and slap them together and weld it. Semi-auto AR-10 receivers, some of them were done that way because that's a really easy way. If you split the thing open, it's easy to just CNC it out. But then you have to weld the whole thing together.
Interesting.
Someone wants to know, are there any examples of the L98 cadet rifle at the Royal Armories preserved?
Yep. A1s, we have several A1s with the hilarious crank handle. And we were working on, just before the pandemic hit, getting hopefully 2 examples of the A2. There is no A3 cadet rifle, but the A2, as I'm sure people know, is essentially just an L85 A2 with no automatic, with no change lever fitted.
Okay. Someone asked if you have technical drawings for the EM2. I'm sure you do in there, right?
We do. We have a full set for rifle number 9, which is great because there are no rifle number 9s, believe it or not, technically. Specifically, and I think a full set for X2E1, which is the 7.62 gun. I say I think because I've never actually looked at all of the drawings. One of our volunteers has abstracted the full set for number 9, but I haven't seen the full set for number 10/X2E1.
Okay.
So that was poor timing on my part when you were still munching sausage roll.
We have a follow-up question, sort of, and I think this gets to a deeper issue. Someone says, do you think the EM2 should have been adopted over the 280 FAL? But when people ask that question, I think they have a tendency to consider the guns in their finalized form.
Yep.
And there never was a finalized EM2. We have some behind-the-scenes footage that people haven't seen yet, where you've got like a bird developing inside of an EM2 within like less than 100 rounds of firing. The gun wasn't finished. It wasn't ready for adoption when it finally got scrapped.
No, it wasn't. It was in roughly the same state of development as the FAL was, which is to say, not finished. The FAL needed quite a lot more development work and trials to get to the FAL that we know today. So they were both unfinished, effectively, which is counterintuitive because you hear about rifle number 9 being adopted, and then you'll learn that there are the developmental guns in different calibers that were. Number 10 was provisionally adopted, rifle number 10, and that becomes the 7.62 gun. But that should really be a clue that actually the gun isn't finished yet because they've still got X numbers, they've still got provisional designations. There is no L1A1. Yeah, that's the thing. just to preempt another question, what would the EM2 have been called? It would have been called L1A1, just like the SLR was. So yeah, the gun was never finished, and it does show, as you say, burrs developing on parts. Yeah, I mean, then it becomes speculative history as to what would have changed beyond what we have.
Do you think the rifle could have been, like, had it gone through a complete finished development cycle, do you think it would have been successful as an issue rifle? Or is it just too complicated and too expensive?
A year ago, I would have said no way. I'm less sure of that now. This is, as you know, the more you research, often the less certain you are about things, and it's definitely the case with the M2. When you look at the archives and you look at the guns developing side by side, they're almost kind of leapfrogging each other, and EM2 is at least as reliable as the prototype FAL, and probably, I'm sure it could have been introduced successfully for a certain value of successfully. I mean, it could have been another SA80 or the original SA80, an alt history SA80. It could have been a disaster. I don't know. It could have been adequate. It could have been fine. But as you allude to, it's so complicated. I think they would have had problems with materials, as we're seeing with the effectively pre-production gun that we were shooting. They would have had issues in the field with soldiers losing parts, I suspect. I mean, if you don't disassemble the bolt group, you're pretty much okay. And it's an easy field strip, as you've shown on your video. It comes apart easily, goes back together easily. It's quick. It was quicker to strip and assemble than the American rifles that it went up against. Certainly than the M1 Garand, that was the control in a lot of the trials. But if anyone decides to get clever and take that backplate off that bolt group,
yeah. I should point out, we have a couple of behind the scenes videos that nobody's seen yet. They're up and they'll be posted over the next, I think, one every week or two. But they're specifically for the folks who do back the Kickstarter. And it is you and a mystery persona from the armories doing some drill and shooting with an EM2, and then field stripping it, and then detail stripping the bolt and looking at exactly what went into the bolt. And I think that will really hammer home to people just the complexity and the expense of EM2 as a design. It's
and
nuts.
if you ask that question of my mystery colleague, he will. Well, I've told you his verdict on it. I think a bag of shit is how he describes it, and in no way is he convinced that it would have been successfully fielded. So I may have. He is, yes. Yeah. If you had it to my head, I'd have to agree with him. But in a 50s context, they were more equal than people think.
Give him a 280 FAL, or give him a T25 or a T44 or whatever it was, and I bet he wouldn't be super thrilled with those either.
He wouldn't, but then I mean, whenever you look at an individual aspect of the gun, you can't help but agree. Like the trigger is awful. The trigger pull of between 7 and 12 pounds or something like that, which goes out of whack as you're using it. Just dreadful. And despite the fact that they did that to eliminate the round the magazine linkage that everyone complains about with bullpups, they did that insanely complicated trigger mechanism purely to reach the bolt assembly in a short.
If the whole mechanism is as long as the linkage would be, you don't need the linkage because you've got just a whole trail of moving parts the whole way.
Yeah, effectively that's what it is, albeit that it's quite short. And you think, oh, well, they've eliminated the round the magazine linkage. That's brilliant. No, it's not brilliant, because the amount of drag and friction and spring tension and just kind of stacks into itself, and it's a dreadful trigger. When you get an armorer to get it running okay, it's fine, but then it goes out.
I got a very cool sneak peek today. VBB SMYT. Who some people may know from some really cool 3D animations on YouTube of various interesting machine guns. He has completed one on the EM2. and gave me a sneak peek at it. And wow, that will also really bring home just how terrible the fire control group is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a funny story there. Well, it's not very funny, but he had just finished, I forget which machine gun he was working on, and came back to us and said, "Have you got any ideas for what I could do next?" And I said, "It's funny you should ask." And I felt quite evil, even giving him the idea, because I thought the poor man will struggle with this, but he didn't struggle with it. He nailed it, just like all the other things that he's done. It's superb. So yeah, I'm looking forward to. I haven't seen the finished version of it myself. I have various bits of it sort of in prototype form, and we've been helping him to really finesse it. So I'm thinking we should use some stills, because he's beautifully color coded these, and I think they will add to my probably quite hard to follow technical descriptions, and the manual isn't that much of a help. So I think we should, with his permission, include a couple of extra illustrations. That
would be great. Yeah. There are two questions here that have come up from a couple of people that we can knock out pretty quickly. First off, someone asked, where are you getting the 280 ammo? But of course, the one you were shooting was in 7.62 NATO.
Yes.
But years ago, when I did the first series of videos, with your help in the background that people generally didn't see, we did a little bit of shooting with a 280, and there is still some of the original 280 ammo around, right?
Yeah. So that, I believe that was at Shrivenham. Is that right? Yeah. They have a supply. I think Warminster, who are the other military collection of firearms in the UK, have some, and we have a pile of it. Unfortunately, it's in an MOD store, and we can't access it. Well, we can, but we haven't set the ball in motion to actually access it. Even when we do, we will struggle more so than those two collections to find a 280 EM2 that isn't unique, because they're all unique in their own way, and we will have to be very judicious about actually putting that ammunition through it. But of course, the temptation is immense. I'll need to write a research proposal to justify it, I think.
You guys only shoot duplicates.
Not as a strict rule, but it's a sound basis for any decision. Is to, if we have more than one, well, that's a pretty good reason to do it.
Okay.
If it's a complete one-off, it's going to be it's basically case by case. My colleague in our what we call the collections services department is writing a new working object policy. So, but that's going to be based on how we do things on our side anyway. So hopefully that shouldn't change too much, because the ability to actually shoot the collection is a strength of the collection.
Very much so. And you actually have a range right there in the facility.
Yep.
So, as a quick update, we are at $565,000.
Wow.
If we hit 581, we become the number 10 project. So that's where I really want to get. We got 92 minutes to get to 581.
Where's my wallet? No.
You don't count. You can't buy extra copies. The other question that a couple people I've seen ask is, in L1A1 and L85, what's the L?
Right. L stands for land service. And so the follow-on question is going to be why? And that's because the original idea for transitioning to a NATO-style system from number 1, Mark 1, whatever, in the 50s, was L for land service, N for naval service, and I believe that the way it was put to me was that the RAF just didn't want to play ball at all, and just didn't even ask. So I don't know what they would have got, but there is actually, I believe there's a piece of artillery that was designated N something, presumably 1, and there is rifle N9 as well, which is not. Yeah, so people call that rifle number 9. Rifle number 9 is the EM2. Rifle N9 is a bolt action 2.2 Enfield for naval service.
Oh, how ludicrously complicated.
Yep. Which is, I guess, partly why the Navy just went, never mind. And we ended up with
don't-
L as our standard number,
Okay.
the designator.
Let's see, what else do we? Have you ever been to the Bovington Tank Museum? I never
Oh,
have.
yes.
I'd like to go.
Yeah, 3 times, I think. Not for a while. I'd like to go back, and they're doing great stuff on YouTube. In fact, someone knew I was going to bring up tea at some point. I think I finished this one. They did a great video on the boiler, the tea boiler, the water boiler for tea that was inside British tanks. Still is inside British tanks. That's worth checking out. No, it's a great museum, and they, like us, they can work their objects, so they drive their tanks. There's Tank Fest every year. It's a great place. I need to go back. It's also just down the road from Monkey World, and if anyone knows British Heritage setup, they're actually the brown signs, the tourist signs. So I'll go and visit a tourist attraction. The one for the Tank Museum says Monkey World Tank Museum, like it's one thing. And it always struck me that would be an even more amazing attraction than either Monkey World, the sanctuary for chimps and monkeys and apes, or the Tank Museum, because you'd have chimps driving tanks.
Terrifying, downright terrifying.
So that was a characteristically long-winded answer, but yes.
I have not been there. I would love to go. I actually really enjoy their tank chat videos.
Yeah,
I find them engaging, interesting, and the guys who run that place clearly know their stuff.
Yep. They actually, the way the lockdown happened for us, we basically pulled the handles a day before the rest of our department kind of just went, we're not getting any direct guidance here, but it seems to be going in this direction, so we're going to remove ourselves from the situation a day early. And then we wished we hadn't, because we missed the filming of one video of the galleries of the exhibition that was going in before my Second World War one, which is now postponed. And which means we didn't get to do what the Tank Museum got to do, which was, in classic British military efficiency, they went, right, we've closed to the public, we're going to do walking tours, record those of all of the galleries, and then they got the staff lockdown message, and they did another day of recording, and then they went home to lockdown, and they have loads of footage in the bank for their YouTube channel. So they were far better organized than we were.
Some people may have wondered why we've never seen pictures of the inside of the NFC. And that's because they have some real security concerns about publishing anything that might show anything security related.
Yep. It's so the funny thing is the Royal Armouries, as the museum, the Leeds Museum, was opened in '96, and I guess that was before the Dunblane massacre, which is what resulted in our handgun ban. And that's kind of where things started to get quite dicey for firearms in the UK. We won't get into it, but more dicey, yeah. So I guess the climate got stricter after that, just the perception, people started to get further removed even than they already were. We never had a huge gun culture, and I'm using that in the positive sense, in the UK anyway, and that just sort of locked things down more. So by the time the National Firearms Centre opened on the same site in 2005, the Home Office, the government, and the local police were, and of course they knew it was lots of prohibited weapons. The armories prior to that did not have a very strong collection of what are prohibited weapons in the UK. So, I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't anything like what the pattern room had. So that just raised all sorts of red flags for potential security risks. And so, if you're already there and operating for decades, you're perhaps less on the radar. If you open a giant room full of guns in 2005 in England, almost inevitably you have to put in some pretty strict security. Now, in fairness, a lot of that you'd need to have anyway, without going into the details. But yeah, in terms of the actual filming of it, there are concerns there over, I guess, people planning some sort of raid or something. So yeah, it'd be great to do some sort of filming in the main hall. But
someone just asked how big is the handgun collection of the NFC? Because every time I've been there, I have only done rifles. And so the funny thing is, they're entirely correct. And the reason is, there is such a huge selection of guns in the NFC that when I'm there, typically it's like 3 or 4 days. And if you have to be disciplined, you have to know what you're going to work on. You go to the thing, you get the thing, and then you go do the filming. Because if you wander into the rabbit hole and just be like, ooh, that's interesting, that's interesting, you will look up and it will be 5 p.m. and they will throw you out. And the handguns are in cabinets with drawers. The rifles are on racks where you can see them, but the handguns are all in cabinets. And I have never had the spare time that I am allowed myself to devote to start opening up handgun drawers, because I don't know what's there yet. So I can't plan on filming them, and I can't take the time to just explore through all the handguns, or else my whole trip will be gone. So I've only ever done long guns there.
Sorry, my Skype is just doing strange things.
You're coming through here okay.
I'll just carry on as though I can't see you anymore. I think it's because I sneakily jumped onto our collections database because I haven't actually done a count. And based on that, we must have about 3,500 pistols.
That's a good start.
And if you include all types of handgun, as in the really antique-y stuff as well, it's got to be over 4,000.
That's a decent start.
Which I suppose proportionally is about right. So we have about 27,000 firearms in the whole collection.
Okay.
So I guess inevitably long guns tend to predominate.
That is an excellent start, by the way. Shifting gears a little bit, now that the A3, the L85 A3 is up and running, is there more that needs to be done? There you go. Yes, HK. Is there more that needs to be done to it? Or is that like, okay, that's it, it's good now, we can move on to other things?
Well, the book has not a chapter per se, but a section at the end about the future, and it's highly speculative. I get my crystal ball out because, well, it's not much of a spoiler, but there was an out-of-service date for SA80 of, well, it was 2020, and it was revised to 2025 in about 2015, and then quietly removed. So there is no out-of-service date for the weapon. It's being upgraded in batches to A3 standard. That's going to take several years, and there are no plans that they're letting us know about. There might be some secret stuff going on, I don't know. We're not aware of any efforts to actually replace it, and I'm not aware of any ongoing efforts to upgrade it either. I imagine if we were still had high intensity operations in Afghanistan or something, there would still be incremental changes being made. But no, right now you've got your sort of frontline, tip of the spear type regular units are getting A3s. Everyone else has different configurations of A2.
Okay. All right. That's a good solid answer for that guy. Artillery is in your title. Do you have artillery in the museum? Someone says they've never seen any on display, presumably aside from the handful of cannon barrels outside the museum.
Yeah, there are, God, I think this is right, 13 pieces of artillery at the Leeds site. So there are several scattered around outside, and there are several around the bottom of the Hall of Steel, which is the big tower, the inside of which is effectively decorated, evoking country houses and that sort of display of arms and armor. There's some really interesting stuff up there, actually. There's captured Boer Mausers are up there, interestingly, which you would not have seen in a country house, typically. And then, obviously, more antique stuff, Civil War era breastplates, things like that. So hardly any artillery, and none in the galleries, none interpreted in any meaningful way. Now, I should stress, I am a small arms specialist. I inherited a new version of the job of keeper was recreated in 2016, which I eventually was persuaded to take up for guns in 2017, and that includes our museum at Fort Nelson, down on the south coast, which is full of artillery of all eras, and those artillery pieces that are displayed at the Tower of London as well, of which there are quite a few, typically older types that fit the sort of ambiance, and then stuff on loan as well, which is true of the firearms as well. So speaking of Scotland earlier, we were speaking of Scotland anyway, the Mons Meg up at Edinburgh Castle. There you go. The giant bombard Mons Meg is actually a Royal Armouries exhibit.
Okay.
But we don't, politically, that would be quite awkward to recall that loan.
Yes, it would. Good luck with that one.
Incidentally, we also have, if you do go to Edinburgh Castle, and you should, it's amazing.
I have. I've seen Mons Meg.
Yes, you have. Did you also see the Great Hall? Full of swords, and it's mainly swords and armor and stuff. There are some muzzle-loading firearms on display, but everything, much like the Tower of London, all of the arms and armour you see that isn't in a regimental museum at Edinburgh Castle is also ours.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, here's an interesting question from the armorer's bench. Which had more potential in terms of engineering design, the EM1 or the EM2?
EM2.
Okay. All right, and moving on.
I did actually, yeah. Short answer, EM2. Long answer, EM2. No. Yes. I think I know the reason for the question, and it's because the EM1, I think I know anyway, the EM1 is stamped steel, and you tend to think in a 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s context, well, pressed steel was the way to go. I think that's the only aspect of the EM1 design that actually would have been straightforward. I'm not saying the EM2 was straightforward by any means, and actually I'm sure if you've got an engineer to break it down, you might find that they're equal, or even EM2 is more complex. But just look at the inside of an EM1, look at the provisional notes for that. It's ludicrously complex, as is EM2. But I think, and to be fair, you raised an excellent point about broaching earlier. So it depends on your setup, I imagine. Is your factory set up for stamping steel? Is it set up for broaching, casting, forging? I'm probably not the right person to answer that one. But my impression is that EM2 was probably the right choice. And it was certainly more developed at the point they chose. In 1950, it was further ahead than EM1.
Now, I think the one that a lot of people don't know about, I mean, to the extent that anybody knows much about any of these, is the Corsac. What is basically a Bullpup FG-42 light machine gun. That's
pretty
super
much
cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything people ought to know more about that besides what I'm sure is in the book?
Well, the key thing about it is this, and I'll try to get into this because nobody knows this stuff. What the British designations of the time actually meant. So we always just say EM2 for shorthand, but as I'm constantly informed by our researcher who knows more about EM2 than anyone in the world, I think, Ian Patrick, he quite rightly points out it's automatic rifle EM2 or AR EM2 because there are other EM2s. So typically we know what we're talking about, so it's EM2 is fine. But automatic rifle was one of several, candidates for an infantry weapon at the time. There were also self-loading rifles, and of course we ended up going for a self-loading rifle. And really what we meant there about when we say self-loading rifle is a full power cartridge, self-loading only, like an M1. Whereas an automatic rifle was well, kind of varies depending on when you're looking at it, but typically it's the British Sturmgewehr It's intermediate cartridge or near as damn it, and it's select fire capability. And then the Corsac is something else entirely. That's a light automatic gun, or LAG. And they came up with this in about 44, if I remember rightly. And sorry, there was another category that I missed was machine carbine, because we ended up with the Patchet as a machine carbine, the Sterling.
Okay.
So machine carbine equals submachine gun, except when they also had that in 7.92 Kurtz, and it meant something slightly different. So complicated. Anyway, but the light automatic gun is quite straightforward. It's the Bren replacement.
Okay.
So it made sense to have a British take on FG42 with the bipod and the FG42 is sort of a quasi bullpup, really, in the way it's designed. And we just took it a step further based on the thinking of the time in the late 40s. So that's your light automatic gun. So in theory, that could have gone into service as like the LSW of the 50s, alongside the EM2 as the automatic rifle. But for reasons that aren't entirely clear, the Bren was basically fine. So they were basically just going to stick with the Bren and rechamber that for either 280 at one time or 4762 later on.
Okay. Did anyone else ever adopt the SA80 outside of the UK? I know there were some small bits sold to other people, but I don't really know the details.
Yeah. Now let me, because I'm far too tired to remember this. Belize is one. While I stall for time while I look up my own book. But I want to give people the right answer here. So
I keep copies of mine right there, easily referenceable on the shelf when people ask me questions.
Well, this shouldn't take too long. So the only one you see these days is Belize. Famously, the Falkland Island Defence Force decided against it. So bear with me. Okay, so a lot of the exports were now, and it's not always clear whether money was exchanged. As people probably know, I think we sold off our L1A1s for like 10 pence each or something as military aid. And that's what happened with a lot of these SA80 contracts. So Zimbabwe, Nepal, Papua New Guinea, as far as I could determine, those were all overseas military assistance.
Okay.
So they're basically free. You'd take SA80s if they were free, surely.
Take one.
The Royal Bermuda Regiment and the Royal Gibraltar Regiments both acquired it. Now they are part of the establishment of the British Army, so of course they did.
Let's be fair, they don't really count for these purposes.
That's kind of what I'm getting at, yeah. So we've got free ones, we've got British extension, British Army family members getting it as well. Belize did buy some. Mozambique bought 650 of them, interestingly. Jamaica, but they are part of the Commonwealth, purchased 4,000.
That's a substantial number.
In 1993.
There's got to be some interesting stories behind some of those adoptions and purchases.
Yeah, I wish I could have found more about these. So I keep saying Belize, it's Bolivia.
Oh, okay.
Countries beginning with B. Bought those in the 1990s. So a lot of these purchases were actually in the 90s, well after it was clear that the A1 was not great. So I think this is like knockdown, bargain basement. Please take some SA80s.
Yeah.
And people might have seen one or two articles on the Firearm blog about Unidad Táctica de Resolución de Crisis or Crisis, who are a Bolivian elite unit, now disbanded, who used it alongside M16A1s. I think if you gave me the choice, I'd probably pick the M16.
Oh, hard admission. You know what?
So that's it. That's it. I didn't count that, but yeah, technically 7, but actually how many outright purchases were there, and yeah.
So you know what the right answer is between L85A1 and M16A1. It's FAMAS. You get a rifle that's good and a bullpup.
Yeah, I'd still take an M16A1.
All right, fine. I'll keep the FAMASs.
But you're right. In the 80s, we were still thoroughly into the bullpup thing. So,
is the British
would we have bought them from France?
Would they have sold them to you?
Yeah, probably the bigger question.
Do you think the British Army is still liking the bullpup concept? If they were just hypothetically to replace the rifle tomorrow, do you think they would still want a bullpup?
This is a bit crystal ball as well, but I don't think so. I mean, we get, in the NFC, we get service people of different sorts coming in. Some are more frontline than others, but all of them pretty much express a preference for ARs, basically.
Okay.
So I suspect, again, if you had one to my head, I would say we would follow New Zealand and buy an off-the-shelf quality AR. LMT, probably, because we bought the sharpshooter from them. So
right. That kind of says something right there.
It does, but then who knows? You know, military procurement is not about what's best, and it's not about what you bought in the middle of a war. It's about all sorts of different factors. And I just don't know, and neither does anyone else.
Interesting question, more towards the book than the guns themselves. But what was the timeline for doing the writing? How long did it take you to, like, did you do a bunch of research first and then start writing, or did you start writing and then, you know, run into questions and do research as questions came up? How did that all work?
The last version, but in a sort of Groundhog Day, actually more like Edge of Tomorrow, really. Just constantly thinking that I'm done and then just finding more stuff or being sent more stuff, and which is great. Constantly revisiting and perfecting and getting better, and it will be much, much better as a result. But at the same time, quite disheartening, because you think, I thought I had that nailed, and then you really don't. So it started out as what now are looking like very off the cuff with the blog posts that I wrote to help to support your videos. Frankly, I'm going to have to go back and fix those, because not only are they much, much shorter and less in depth than the equivalent sections of the book, they are also wrong now.
I understand how that goes.
I guarantee you, I absolutely guarantee you, if you research something in this level of detail, anything you wrote or thought about it 2 years prior was just wrong. Not anything, but a lot of it was wrong.
Right.
And because there are levels of understanding that are, you know, a working knowledge, and then there's just finding out all of this amazing new information. So, so from mid 2017 or something, starting to actually, because it's not like I didn't do any research for those, I absolutely did, but it was quite a compressed time scale, on and off. So a few months on, a few months off. It's been several years, 3 years, and probably 18 months of solid work until I turned in the final draft. But then, of course, as you will know all too well, we have the editing phase, and even more stuff has come to light. So.
I will air some of the head stamp internal dirty laundry here. Every once in a while, I get a note from Nick going, "He wrote more. I thought we were done, and then he wrote more."
Yeah, but then when I show him what I found, it's like, yeah, okay, we're gonna have to put that in.
Yep. Oh, it's always a good thing. I was there too. Like,
editor's prerogative at any stage. You can cut me off.
There's stuff that I would have loved to add to my book, but at a certain point, you have to end it. Like, that's it, and off it goes.
Yep.
So
I'm trying to keep it now to just corrections, although there are a couple of key bits of information that are like a sentence that I'm going to have to squeeze in.
So someone else asked, like, have you started printing the books yet? And the answer is no. We're at the position of basically the manuscript is finished, or very close to finished. Last bit of editing, run through it's an infinite number of run throughs to try and find all the little typos and issues, and you never quite get them all. But we're going to do our darndest to get as many as we possibly can. And then that's kind of concurrent with doing the layout, where we actually add the photographs to the text, lay it all out, make it look gorgeous. Once that's done, and by the way, we've already done technical review. This ran through several other subject matter experts on the various guns, I assume, right?
It did, yeah, although admittedly for the early stuff, not many people know much about them.
Yeah.
So it gets, and of course there's more information to know about the later ones anyway. So all the more reason to get it peer reviewed. But absolutely, yeah. So people who know what they're talking about have definitely gone over it.
Yeah. So
and in fact, I'm still sorry, but yeah, just part of the reason I'm still adding in or correcting myself is that I'm still receiving comments from one of my reviewers.
Of course, yeah. But every one of those, like, but that's important. That needs to go in. That needs to be fixed. So
yep.
At any rate, we're at the point where basically we're ready to start doing the layout. That'll take a couple of weeks, and then off it goes to the printer. So we don't know exactly how COVID is going to affect the printing and the fulfillment and the shipping and all that sort of stuff. So we have very deliberately written ourselves a pretty liberal timescale into the Kickstarter, promising books, if I remember this off the top of my head, I believe February. If we can beat that, we certainly will, but we don't want to guarantee anything that we don't know that we can actually meet. Obviously, we had some of those issues on my book that was slightly delayed.
Yep.
So let's see, what else do we have in here that people are asking about? You know, we haven't talked at all about the bolt actions. That was all like Boer War stuff, wasn't it? That's the classic example of you design the weapon system to win the war that you just finished fighting, not necessarily the next one. So what was it about the Boer War that contributed to the Thorneycroft and the Godsall?
It's mobile. I keep saying mobile infantry. That's Starship Troopers.
All right, we're going to have to get infantry into that in a moment. You mentioned Edge of Tomorrow, now Starship Troopers. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But
yeah, it's just, you know, when you get a blind spot and you just keep saying the wrong thing. So mounted infantry, who are actually a really fascinating unit type that I need to, once I've finally finished all this, maybe do a bit of not a deeper dive, but a wider dive, if that makes sense, into the military history of these guys, because they are fascinating. So they are dragoons in modern form, modern for 1900.
Okay.
Or 1890s, and they ride to battle on horseback. They've got like bandolier type equipment, and then they dismount and they fight like infantry, and then they get back on their horses and go wherever they're going. So there's some great artwork and a few photos floating around from that era. So, and this is how we end up with SMLE. That and the Indian Army, who are doing really good sort of tactical thinking at that time, they realize, as I'm sure people already know, that you can shorten the Lee Enfield, bring the sight base, make the sight base shorter, stick a charger guide on there, and make it a bit more fit for purpose as a modern combat rifle. So that's where we end up going. In the meantime, these kind of crazy gentleman inventors, Thorneycroft, Farker, who did like the lion's share of the actual design work on the Thorneycroft, and Godsall, around the same time, 1901, 1902, so just as the Boer War is winding, the Second Boer War is winding up, influenced by what's going on in the news, what's going on with their military contacts, and of course Thorneycroft's brother was, it's called Thorneycroft's Mounted Infantry for a reason. He actually had a unit of these guys, so they're talking to each other. I'm sure that somewhere there'll be letters that I haven't been able to discover, sadly, but or there were letters, sadly, probably no longer in existence, where they talk about this stuff. And they go a parallel, different route. It really is like alt history, this stuff. So we end up with SMLE, but what they go for is a bullpup for the same reason, something short that you can draw from a scabbard or a boot, as we sometimes call it, that's on your horse, draw it quickly, draw it easily. If you're having to shoot from the saddle, you can do that. If you're not, it's still easier to draw it from the ground than it is a longer rifle. But it gives you the long barrel, the full powder burn, all of those attributes that the Bullpup is still somewhat sought after for. But they are still gentlemen eccentrics with rifle shooting interests.
Okay.
They're not quite dialed into the actual military reality of this, and they're a little bit behind the curve because the War Department, the War Office are already developing SMLE by 1902. It's into final trials, so there's no chance that either of these guys are going to make it. But they try anyway, and the Small Arms Committee duly put them through trials to varying degrees, which you'll find out in the book.
Okay.
So yeah, it's this alternate history version of a compact. I would say carbine, but it can't be a carbine because it's got a full-length rifle barrel.
Are they like Bullpup Lee Enfields, or are they mechanically different?
Completely different. Yeah. So both of them at different times are building prototypes with Enfield barrels, but that's it. Everything else on there is of their own design, which is probably a mistake, actually. They might have got more traction if they'd used Lee Enfield stuff.
Okay. All right. So, Spill, are you a total sci-fi nerd?
Oh, yes.
It's seeming like it.
Yeah, can't keep it in.
I saw a bunch of comments on the videos we did about the various stretch goals that we hit, talking about the various trinkets you had back on the bookshelf behind you. And there was a wide variety of various sci-fi sort of things back there. What's your particular area of interest?
Pretty wide ranging. I'm never a huge reader of either sci-fi or fantasy, but I'm more of a film consumer in terms of sci-fi. The classics, stuff you didn't see. I've got a Terminator head up there, Terminator endoskeleton skull, a few other bits and bobs. All the classics: Aliens, Predator. Absolutely love Predator. I've got a few things up there as well along those lines. I guess it's the sci-fi action horror especially. The Event Horizon is an absolute favorite of mine.
I like that one. Yeah, I like that one.
That probably gives you an idea.
Okay. All right. And what do you think of the poster?
Yeah, I must admit, I was. I'm not drawn to photos of myself. I hate watching myself back on TV when I do documentaries and things. So the idea of being put on a poster, obviously inspired by your Gun Jesus one, was a little horrifying at first. But then when they sent through the provisional versions, that's awesome.
It looks so cool.
I can't not like that. So
I'm so glad.
No, I'm really pleased with that.
And you are basically like a renowned expert in vampire hunting too, right?
I wouldn't go that far. Although I have a couple of times presented at a parapsychology conference. No, I am not the Peter Venkman end of the spectrum on that stuff. I'm very much a skeptic. Perhaps he was as well. So that I was, and good thing about some of these, that's a fascinating field because it runs the gamut from people who are full into this stuff and believe all of it to academic skeptics who are fascinated in the phenomenon of it and that sort of thing. So I went and talked about the vampire hunting kits. That's my main area, my only real area of expertise in that world, but obviously overlaps with other areas of literature and film that I do like as well. But that in researching that, I learned a hell of a lot about the folklore, so the real history of not actually killing vampires, but what people believed and what they actually used, which was improvised stuff. As I like to say, it was more like Shaun of the Dead than Dracula. Spades, stakes, that kind of shovels.
Now, the cool thing
So,
about
so
the...
the,
Oh, go ahead.
no, well, the only other thing I say is that's partly why these things are more about pop culture than they are about real history, because something like that didn't exist historically. That this is something that was invented for the movies and is then bled back into history.
So my understanding is this is like you can find occasionally vampire hunter kits that people put out there, but like some of them are Victorian or Edwardian era, aren't they? Or like from that, but claiming to be older, or are they all modern claiming to be Victorian? It's one of those things. Like, I know there are wheel locks, like fancy wheel lock pistols out there that are
Yeah.
Victorian era, but they were in the Victorian era made as counterfeits of guns that were 100 years older. But today they're cool historical replicas because, hey, they're from the Victorian era.
That's basically it.
Okay.
It's a version of that. So as far as we can tell. So if you want to be strictly academic about it, strictly scholarly, the first appearance that's confirmed of a vampire hunting kit is the film Fright Night in 1985. There's a guy who claims to have invented one before that, and he may well have done. I actually wrote to him because of it. Well, I can't put him on a polygraph or anything, and they're pretty dubious anyway. But I can at least get him to admit on, like, I send him an Armory's headed letter and say, you've claimed on the internet that you invented these, did you? And he did write back, and he said, yep, I had an antique store in somewhere in London, probably Brick Lane or something, in 1972, and I made this up to help sell my antiques, to put it in the window as a cool thing, and people thought it was great, and someone bought one. And that's the start of this whole vampire killing kit thing. And it may well be, that's still well within it's even closer to the heyday of Hammer horror and all that. I'm very prepared to believe that they are at least as old as 1970-ish. But I don't think they're any older than that.
Okay.
But
I have to say that is slightly disappointing, but not so.
Well, yeah, I know. Yeah, and for some people it is, but I think where I felt like I was picturing Captain Holt from Brooklyn Nine-Nine doing his vindication thing. Because for me, that moment came when the British Library borrowed our vampire killing kit that we actually did buy for display in their exhibition about the Gothic, so Gothic literature, Gothic film, Gothic everything. And that was a huge success. They knew exactly what it was, so did we. And once the visitors saw it, they did too. And a lot of people weren't disappointed. They still thought it was a cool bit of, like a film prop.
Okay.
It's more like a film prop than anything else. And of course, there's a whole parallel market for that sort of thing. And we recently opened a permanent display at the Armories that displays some cool stuff from the films and TV as well. So it lives in that sort of what the academics would call a liminal space between what most people would think of as real historical artifacts and modern culture.
Okay. By the way, we are just shy of 570 now. Ooh. So we're like 11,000 away from the number 10 spot, which would be awesome. It'd be very cool to knock down number 10.
Yeah, I might have to go and grab that beer in a minute.
We've got 52 minutes left, so you're only required to stay awake for about. We could do like 51 minutes if the live stream ends with you just keeling over. I think people would find that very suitable.
I don't mind. I can power through. If you need a break or anything, I will run off and grab a beer.
Well, I cracked open my cider here.
Yeah. Why didn't I stock up earlier? That was silly. Oh well.
I don't know. You were busy writing more stuff for the book that Nick has to edit.
Actually, strangely, I wasn't. I was. What was I doing? I was researching the Knights Templar. Because there's some stupid new documentary that's just recently aired. And you can probably guess where. The History Channel.
Yes, they don't really do history, do they? Not anymore.
Well, unfortunately, one of my career highlight, other than this, was filming with Sean Bean for the Waterloo documentary that we did, and that was History Channel, and they did a great job of it. And it's such a shame. It depends entirely which production company they hire, what the subject matter is, who they speak to. They can still do it, although that was 5 years ago now. So.
Yeah. Someone asked, "Are you friends with Stephen Fry?" Or is that just something he says? I don't know what the reference is there.
I know what the reference is, but I'm wondering who that is and how they know that. No, I'm not friends with Stephen Fry. But in 2013 and 14, or 14 and 15, 13 and 14, I think it was, we did 2 episodes of a game show, but a very highbrow game show called QI, which you might have made it to the States. I don't know. And that was hosted by Stephen Fry at the time. It's really good, really good. So you have a classic panel show with like a comedian as the team leader on both sides, and then revolving door of guests, some comedians, some just celebrities, and it's QI Quite Interesting is the title. So they ask a question, and I can't remember what the questions would have been, but it would be something like, how do you shoot round corners with a gun? And we brought our Sturmgewehr with the Krumlauf device on the end of it, and they displayed that on camera. And that was just going to be a nursemaid job, because we have to send 2 people with all museum objects to make sure they don't get licked or dropped or whatever. And we showed up at the studio, and I met Stephen Fry and spoke to him, and he's just as great in real life as you would imagine if you've ever watched him in anything. And handed this thing over, wearing my museum gloves, of course. And the sort of gaffer that took it off me went, "Right, so we're going to hang this from some fishing line." And I said, "No, you're not. You're really not. Unless you have some shark line or something, there's no way we can allow that." So he was looking at me, and I'm thinking, why is he looking at me? And I'm wearing a black jacket, and he said, "Well, could you hold it up, and we'll take a photo," because they need a photo for the screen behind the presenter. If you just, or each side, I think it was, if you just hold it up, like how would you hold it? Well, I'd hold it like this, immediately regretting it because my upper body strength is non-existent, and it's like a stress position to hold that beast for any length of time.
Thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And already long story, slightly shorter. They photoshopped a German helmet onto my head, and a brick wall in front of the gun, and I was on TV in that form. And then the following year, they obviously got the arms bug and wanted to do the pissing in machine guns myth, which turns out not to be a myth, as I'm sure you know already, and other people will know. It did happen in emergencies. So we actually helped with research for that one, and I should probably write that up at some point if I haven't already somewhere. Because there are a few instances of it happening, and so they wanted a Vickers gun. So we took a Vickers gun down and put it on a trolley. And again, I was not supposed to appear in any way for that, but our media person at the time said, "Oh, you should totally be the one to wheel it on in front of Stephen Fry." And no, it's fine. I can live without that. Don't need that. That's fine. And she went, "No, I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell him it's your birthday. And you're going to, no. So she did. And they went, "Oh, all right then." So they took the brown kind of navvy's coat off the guy that was going to wheel it on and gave it to me. And I wheeled it on thinking, if I'm going to miss my mark on the floor, there's literally a mark on the floor to wheel this thing on. I'm going to knock this Vickers gun off the trolley. It's going to collapse, but it was fine. So yeah, sorry, very long-winded reply there, but that they were great. It was really good to do that. We came back the following year just to watch filming because we did some more research for them, but then it went a bit quiet, and then the presenter changed and stuff. So yeah, so I've met him 3 times, but we are certainly not friends.
Okay. Fair enough. Your favorite rifle, would it be one of the Bullpups, or would it be something different? If you have a favorite rifle.
I suppose, like most people who look into these things quite intensely for a period of time, EM2 is probably my favorite rifle at the moment. But if I had to pick an all-time favorite, it's probably going to be the boring choice of an AR or an AK.
Okay.
And then you'd have to put the proverbial gun to my head as to which one. Probably lean towards the AR-15. So again, things you grow up watching and reading about. It's got that classic appearance, does the job, still around today. It's true of both of them, but yeah, things like EM2 are fascinating, but they are for the likes of us to learn about and talk about and write books about and for people to read about.
I would do terrible, terrible things for a left-handed EM2 commando.
Yes. Well, I think you already know this, but people watching won't. And I think he had two of them, but the guy who wrote the big EM2 book, Tom Dougalby. Yeah. Is that how you pronounce his name? So. He had at least one, if not two, EM2s, and one of them was converted to left-handed operation.
I did not know that. Oh,
yes.
Wow. How did he get
quite
his
know
hands
how.
on those?
One of them came out of a UK collection.
Back in the day, sometimes that happened.
Yeah, well, it happened with the pattern room.
Right.
And it happened, and still happens in theory, with, well, I don't know. No, see, they wouldn't have done that with something like an EM2, but there have been sales from the MOD collections where they've rationalized the collection and put stuff through auction houses. But for, I guess, political reasons, they tend not to be modern weapons. Yeah. So select fire rifles would not feature. But one of them made it out of one of those collections and out of the UK in the 70s, 80s, early 80s.
Okay.
Although that wasn't his, because he had his already. Yeah, actually, come to think of it, I don't know how he got his. How he got his? I'd have to double check. But there was one sold. In fact, as one of our supporters for the book contacted me recently and told me about one that was sold in 1983 and made it over to the US. So, or Canada, they're not sure. So there are a couple floating around, and two in museums in the US as well.
Right. One of them being in Cody, where we were looking at it. So, in fact, that's
absolutely,
we think Jansen's personal rifle.
Yeah, there's being strictly kind of. I have a reference here that says this was transferred for these reasons. That's nearly always not the case. So what we know that was presented, above board and everything, and we know that Jansen worked for Winchester. So it's there's a strong connection to him. Whether that was presented to him personally in some ceremony at Enfield or not, we don't know.
Okay. I need just a moment because my earphones are just about to die, so I'm going to go get a second set, and I will be right back.
I think that's just an excuse to get more alcohol. I don't have that problem because I have the old-fashioned piece of wet string connecting me to my device. Could totally be getting that beer right now. It's okay, we can stop talking about him now. He's back. I can hear you. I've just seen. I'm just jealous. Also jealous of the globe thing that it's all in as well. Really?
Okay.
That's not code for you burgled him, is it?
No, I really honestly did not. Sorry about that, guys. I was muted for a moment there, and now I am not muted. Hopefully I am not echoing now. I had a neighbor who moved and had more furniture and junk than they wanted to take with them, and that was just up for grabs, and I snagged it. So, all right, let's see. Hopefully, we're still getting comments. There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. There was a bit of a delay of people who couldn't hear me, so I'm good now.
Yeah. So I've also started looking at the questions and comments, and favorite gun in the book has been clarified. Well, I think I've covered that one.
It sounds like EM2.
It's got to be EM2. Yeah. The Edwardian stuff is very, has that sort of steampunk aesthetic and makes the poster so awesome. But there's just something about that space age era and something that in theory is still viable,
Yeah.
And as various people love to speculate, we could have had in service into the 70s, 80s, maybe.
It would not have prevented 5.56 from happening.
No.
280 would not have been a substitute for 5.56.
No.
Although,
it's just going to delay things, I think.
280 is still not really shoulder full auto practical. It's less powerful than 308, but it's nothing like 5.56 or 5.45. You've still got 20 round magazines. So the ammunition carrying capacity that you get from 5.56 is still a thing. I think it would be better than 7.62 NATO for an infantry rifle, but it would not have stood in the way of 5.56 being adopted.
No. Well, the Brits thought 280 was controllable in EM2 at least. I don't think the Americans were convinced of that or didn't care. And then, of course, as soon as you go to 7.62 NATO, it's just not a proposition. So the 50s Enfield and Pendine people would disagree, but that's largely because they are not actually firing much, if anything, from the shoulder. They're mainly firing from the assault position, from the waist. There's some talk about burst firing from the shoulder, but the trial results weren't great for that anyway. But then I must admit, see, you're in a stronger position than me here because you have fired a 280. All I would say in vaguely connected to that, not really, is that I found the 7.62 gun very soft shooting. For a 7.62 gun, think of a G3 or an FAL, and that thing felt, even with the 60-year-old hard rubber butt plate.
I found a very noticeable difference between the 280 and the 308. The 280 was a much nicer cartridge in EM2.
I can well imagine that.
Now, that's from a grand total of 10 cartridges fired, because we did that shooting session on pretty short notice, and they were able to allocate us 10 rounds. So, if I remember, I think we did 4 rounds semi-auto and then 2 3-round bursts.
Well, my backup plan, if we can't legitimize shooting of a museum 280 EM2, is to take a few H40 containers or whatever down to Shrivenham or Warminster and beg them to let me shoot one of theirs. And here's some ammo.
You should. It's an experience you ought to have, I think. But.
Yeah, I'd have liked to have sorted that out before we finalised the book, but for obvious reasons that wasn't possible.
Yeah. Let's see. Someone. There we go. Let's see if that fixes that. All right. Let's see. What else do we have? So yeah, now that I don't have headphones, people can hear YouTube notification sounds here.
Yeah.
And I will be honest, I'm not entirely sure how to fix that. Because
well, while you're trying to do that, I'm going to respond to the to the question that's come in above, because I absolutely love AC/DC. Yeah, the AC/DC kind of history of the band book. I forget what it's called. Is it Dirty Deeds? It's called. Yeah, I haven't read that for a very long time. It is on my bookshelf. And my favorite track, Thunderstruck. It's a tough one. It's like choosing favorite rifles, but I think it would have to be Thunderstruck. I've seen them live 4 times.
All right, I have absolutely no idea how to get rid of the YouTube sounds. I apologize, guys.
Actually, just to pivot that one back to more direct relevance, not that I object to the question by any means, I wish I could have somehow made this happen, but they always had some sort of fake cannon on the stage, pair of cannons, whatever, like, with pyros going off. I would have loved to have done a live blank fire of some real artillery during a show somehow. I'm sure that would be health and safety impossible these days, but that would have been amazing. Even better to get the Royal Artillery involved and do it live on a field firing range with them playing on the field firing range.
That would be super cool.
As long as we're, making stuff up.
Someone asked if muzzle brakes are incorporated into the book. Most of these rifles don't really have any muzzle devices, do they?
They do have. Well, they have muzzle devices. There are no muzzle brakes by the strict definition of what a muzzle brake is. There are compensators.
Okay.
In fact, and I don't know when this was done, but there's an EM2 with 2 parallel cuts on the top of the barrel to act as a compensator.
Interesting.
Actually, no, that is for flash elimination. But I think it might function in that way, because from memory, I don't think there are any cuts underneath. And there's the Steve Raw goes into this in far more detail than I was prepared to for this, because we're trying to cover all the British bullpups and not go too far down the rabbit hole on any one of them, which is the compensator designed by a company called Date Style in the UK, which he's convinced would have made a significant difference to SA80, but wouldn't have solved the reliability issues, of course, and he doesn't claim that either. So yeah, there are weird and wacky muzzle devices, but by and large, the Enfield weapon system and the fully developed SA80 just have versions of a bird cage, and always did. A little bit like an AUG bird cage, but not quite. The diameter to launch rifle grenades off, that was their main concern, other than flash suppression. And that's kind of it. Nothing before that has a muzzle device. Everything else is just a plain muzzle, except for on EM2 there is what's referred in one source to starting to lose the plot here in one source as the Trident Bayonet, which is the blade of the bayonet forms one prong, and then there are 2 prongs on the top of the muzzle ring, and that forms a flash suppressor, and that is explicitly what that is. That's not a wire breaker. That might have worked as one, but that's not what it's designed for. It is a muzzle device.
That was
bayonet
used.
That's a muzzle device.
That was used on the FAL.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same. Obviously, there is parallel development here for a very long time, even after Britain names the EM2 as what it wants to go for, but in reality, trials are carrying on in parallel. So accessories, rifle grenade provision, bayonets, although the bayonet is different, but some certain features are mirrored.
Okay. Have you done any looking into any serious consideration of other modern bullpups? How would you compare SA80, like SA80 A3, to the other currently available bullpups, if you've had a chance to consider them?
Yeah. Well, one thing that was a bit of a revelation for me in researching and writing this in the later stages was the sheer reliability of A2 and therefore A3, because they're the same gun with some additions, H&K seem to have absolutely nailed it. And even if the figures are somehow inflated or off base in some way and can't be directly compared with other things, which is, the latter thing is certainly true, it's insanely reliable. And why shouldn't it be? Short stroke gas piston, rotating bolt. If it's designed and made correctly, it should be absolutely bomb-proof. And it now seems to be genuinely more reliable, dare I say, than an AR.
Ooh, strong words.
According to the sources. That's not to say that, a bit like the TFB thing about AUG and AR, we get into pissing contests over what's more reliable, what's more accurate. They're all fine.
Yes, yeah.
Basically. And SA80 is fine now, but it is still excessively heavy.
Okay.
They've improved and replaced everything they could. The optic has been, although SUSAT was an excellent optic for the time, and even now some people prefer its field of view, but reticle wise it's well behind the curve. It's a heavy lump of it's aluminium casing, but it weighs a ton. So they've replaced that with the Elcan. Made it somewhat modular. You can attach what one of my colleagues lovingly refers to as low-hanging fruit to it, and they do. But it still weighs an absolute ton and can't fire from the left shoulder. Now that another I won't say misconception, but something that people perhaps place too much emphasis on is the left shoulder firing thing. Because first of all, you can and do teach all your soldiers to fire off the right shoulder, which you had to with the Lee Enfield anyway, had to with the Bren gun anyway. So that's, in a military context, it's not such a big drawback that people tend to think it is. And then the current, thankfully, and people again look at the piggyback RMR on the Elcan, the LDS, lightweight day sight as it's known, and say that's ridiculous. That's like a beard weld, to actually see through that thing. Well, arguably, yes, it is, but it's an emergency sight, and it allows you to fire off the left shoulder.
That's an interesting point.
By essentially keeping your face away from the brass.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
It's not ideal, don't get me wrong. But equally, with an AUG, you're not swapping ejection covers and extractors in the middle of a firefight. So
right. Yeah, there are very few that are actually interchangeable on the fly.
Or forward ejecting. So yeah, sorry, that's only a couple of examples. But yeah, how does it stack up against the MDR? Well, the MDR is not really designed as a military rifle and is unproven in that sphere.
I would say the real...
You know more about that than me.
I would say the real comparisons you would have to make would be it'd be SA80, well, L85A3 or A2, the FS2000,
yep,
which has been militarily adopted by real people. The AUG. The AUG's probably the biggest one.
Yeah.
And then it would be the FAMAS, except the FAMAS never really... I mean, it sort of got modernized with optics, but not really, and it's now been replaced. So I really think it comes down to those three, primarily the AUG and the SA80, are the two bullpups in significant service today.
I'd keep the FAMAS in the running just because there's still a lot of them around.
Well, and it is the best, but
and I'm coming to that. And there's at least most of those in service. Is it fair to say, or is it what sort of percentage have some sort of optic rail on there? So you at least have an optical sight.
A fair number of them do, but it's kind of a kludged on rail that's a very high cheek weld.
Okay.
The modernization they did was the Valorisé, which drops the carry handle. It has some durability problems. I've heard a lot about like charging handles are fragile on them, and there aren't that many of those things around.
Yeah. Well, I think that alone probably means SA80 gets to beat something.
Yeah. Yeah.
AUG,
it's a good gun.
They're not. It's good. We haven't got direct figures to compare reliability wise. quite possible that modern SA80 is actually more reliable than that, but can't say that. You still can't fire that off the left shoulder. It weighs a good 8 pounds plus, just like SA80 does. It doesn't have Stanag magazine compatibility.
Nick is screaming about the EF88 and the F90, by the way.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he is. If that proverbial, I keep saying this, I probably shouldn't, but if the proverbial gun is to my head, I'm going to go with an EF88 over an SA80A2.
Okay. Sad but honest.
Yeah.
By the way, we're like $8,000 away. We are extremely close now. We're at we're over 573 now. 573,200. Like
starting to feel a bit like a telethon.
It's not close. We got 25 minutes to go. So I hope we make it. I really hope we make it. But
quick, be more interesting.
Someone asked if you could buy any one gun without having to worry about licenses or permits, what would you want to have?
Well, again, right now it's probably going to be an EM2, isn't it? But as long as we're in fantasy land where I can own it in the first place, I may as well be able to acquire it as well. Should be virtually impossible.
EM2 is a really hard one to object to.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. We're in the jurisdiction that we're in, but that's desirable and like rocking horse poop for anyone, isn't it? So that's got to be pretty high on the list. What else that isn't EM2 or isn't in the book? I would very much like an M16A1.
So boring.
I know, but it isn't for us.
Yeah, and it's it's a damn good gun.
Fondle them, and you can get to shoot one every now and again, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah, and boring as it may sound, it's a darned good gun.
Yeah, and by this point, it has so much history attached to it, and if you had one that had provenance, evidence history attached to it, that would make it all the cooler.
Yeah.
As I bore anyone that will listen, we have in the collection serial number 266, model 601, with the green painted furniture. So that.
Nice.
Or serial number 1 or something, which I have thankfully also got my hands on.
One of the funny things I ran into, I was at the Dutch Military Museum. I'm sure you know Matthew, the curator there.
I do, yeah. But I've never been to his museum. Not yet.
No, I'm sorry. It's Canadian. I've had too much cider now. The Canadian War Museum has a collection of guns confiscated from Somali pirates. Because
amazing.
The Canadian military did some operations in the Gulf of Aden in counter-piracy, and they brought home a bucket of rusty stockless AKs. And they're sitting there in the racks, and it's this fantastic assortment of, weird rusty crap that is what genuine Somali pirates were using.
Weird rusty crap is what I spend my acquisition time, other than beautiful antique firearms as well, of course, looking for, because it's this, stuff with the history. And we have this annoying disconnect post pattern room. Now that this collection is not military per se, we don't have the direct links with the people that are collecting this stuff in the field. So we do get stuff, but it's sporadic. And it's kind of not necessarily what we're able to choose. So it's just stuff that turns up, and then we manage to ask someone where it came from and get a little bit of history. So like an insurgent, an Iraqi insurgent, number 4 Enfield. Desert spray paint, shitty sight rail welded to the top of it, and it's a Susat sight rail, which may reflect a bit of dark history that we don't want to think about. But it's Now, unfortunately, we don't even know the full details of that capture either. But that's just to illustrate how it goes down. So we would love some rusty crap from Somalia, for example. What we do have in that vein is the other end of the story, because we have the SAR80 or SAR80. Sterling made Sterling Assault Rifle 80, and a couple of the Singaporean versions as well.
Nice.
Which then turned up on pirate boats with the stock removed.
Always without the stocks. Oh, let's see. What else do we have here? Someone's asking why the U.S. military has historically been very skeptical of bullpups, and I just don't have a good answer for that one. That is not something that I've looked into. I don't know if you have, or if you ran into any of that. Well,
I've looked into it as much as I possibly can, and disappointingly, it's not entirely clear. I have a strong sense that there's institutional and maybe even national bias against unorthodox or bullpup configuration, but then the modern bullpup was invented for target shooting in America, so it's clearly not, and there are plenty of Americans that we know that absolutely do love bullpups. So I think even that modern picture is probably skewed.
Okay.
But yeah, historically I looked at all sorts of like handbooks, weapon design publications, trials reports, obviously, lots of those of different sorts, and various things do comment on bullpup configuration, but they're disappointingly neutral. Apart from EM2, and plenty of details of that in the book, where certain American views are made very clear about, and there's one from I think it's the Spew trials, where there's the classic objection to, what if this thing blows up and takes my face off, which you still see today. So it's there, but it's not there as overtly as you would think. Military trials, if anyone that's been following James Reeves's reading of trials reports, will know, just from reading those couple that he's sort of brought to light there, they're quite boring and sober studies. They really are trying to be quite objective. And in fairness, those early American trials are very objectively run and very fair to EM2 and cite its advantages. They are not overtly against this thing. We can blame Studler for most of the objection, I think, on that. So yeah, sorry, very roundabout, rambling answer, but it's nearly 5 a.m.
And we're almost there. 18 minutes to go. Then the Kickstarter ends and you can get some sleep. And I can also go to bed, but I haven't been up for 24 hours, so.
I've just noticed that the question about best modern bullpup was... Did we actually answer best modern bullpup?
I think you said you would take an EF88 over and...
Effectively EF88. Yeah, I kind of got conned into that one by the Australian contingent. No, I think that's probably fair. I think the amount of development work that's gone into, and because the Australians and the New Zealanders actually both had strong. This is where you see military objections to bullpup configuration firearms. It's not so much from the American military because they'd already said no to them. It's from the Aussies and New Zealanders, very polarized. Some who do like them and a lot who don't. And some of that is quality control issues early on, as it was with SA80 and has happened with other weapons as well. And some of that is just an absolute aversion to, it's almost like that kind of stereotypical American aversion to bullpups is not an American aversion. It's just a people aversion. Some people just don't like bullpups.
That would be the 10% of us who are left-handed, mostly.
So that won't help, yeah, I'm sure. So the fascinating thing about the Commonwealth picture is you see New Zealand just go, sod it, we give up, we hate this thing, and go for the L&T Defender. I think I'm right in saying it's late. I think that's right. And then the Aussies develop arguably the ultimate version, perhaps literally the ultimate version, we don't know, of the Steyr AUG, which is so different that it's actually a derivative of. It's not a direct copy anymore. It's substantially improved.
I've never had a chance to actually take a close look at one of the Australian Steyrs.
Sadly, neither have I. We have first gen ones in our collection, but that's all. We don't have any, I don't think, of the later iterations. Again, it's if we can't reliably get things from our own military, we really struggle to get them from Australia. And there's a sad tale there where we actually had very willing contacts that were very happy to get us. One was it going to be? I think it was going to be an SA2, so the current service version, not EF88s quite yet. But the Australian government was going to mandate that they be deactivated. And for the sheer cost of getting them to us, I had to say no.
That sucks.
Just like, part of me thought, do I just try and not steal, but like obtain money from the central pot that's supposed to fund like medieval armor and swords and antique firearms and cannon and all of that, to fund some welded lumps of gun? We have a policy that we don't collect deactivated firearms, so we do make exceptions for obvious reasons, but we didn't for that. So
yeah.
One day, hopefully, if they don't destroy them all.
Yeah. What's your favorite Russian/Soviet weapon? And is it also a strange bullpup like Max is going to write about?
No. No, that's got to be some flavor of AK.
That's right, you did say that.
What? Yeah, there's definitely something about the AK. Probably favourite's difficult because I haven't had, all my shooting experience has been with like Type 2 and 3 and AKM. So, because I want to say Type 1 AK because that's the rare, interesting early type.
Yeah, have you shot a 5.45?
Yes. Yeah, actually, you know what?
They're nice.
Yeah. If it depends. Favourite in what context? Favourite in a historical context? Favourite in a shooting it on the range for fun context or research? Or favourite in some sort of operational capacity? Well, I don't have that experience. So yeah, if we're talking about shooting experience, AK-74.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. That muzzle brake.
12.5-inch barrel, folding stock, AK-74. Boom, done.
Difficult one.
It's just the right
balance.
balance.
I guess. AKS-74U.
No, that's too short.
Too short, you think?
Too short,
on a 15-meter test range, it's fine. Although we know when we had to do a bit of testing on that informally, and the difference was noticeable even at 15 meters. So yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's one of those. If you did some sort of zombie apocalypse scenario, it's probably be a modern AR or a 74 or an AK-200 or something like that. But then I don't know. Although I was quite intrigued by some of the reliability meltdown videos that were done recently, where the 5.45 guns were not lasting as long in those extreme circumstances. Something to do with chamber pressure. I think I had to ask some knowledgeable people why are these things failing. So there's something about that combination of 7.62 by 39 plus the mechanical advantage plus the overgassing plus the loose clearances that makes a classic AK super reliable, and perhaps the 74s and the 100s and the 200s maybe don't. Well, it depends which series in the 100.
We are at, by the way, like $5,200 to go to take number 10.
Oh.
We got 12 minutes. I think we can pull it off. But it's going to be really close. We'll see. You guys can do it. Here's a good question. This one may be a bit much for the brain at 24 hours up and 5 in the morning now, but someone asked about an idealized bullpup, which to me is like, you've seen, you spent many years now specifically looking at a bunch of the military bullpup designs. Is there anything, having seen that you would say, this, like, they kept getting this wrong, or they should have fixed that and it would have made the whole gun better? Or are there just inherent limitations to the concept, and there was, like, this is as good as you can make it, there's no magic solution?
I think, well, now that I've been let a lifeline by our Australian friends, that's probably as good as you're going to get, a military grade, if you like, to misuse that term, bullpup. I can't see, like, yeah, there are attempts to solve with forward ejection and stuff, and maybe F2000 is the gun, but I don't see the evidence for that. So something like maybe I was going to say Tavor, but I don't think that's as accurate as an EF88. Certainly not as accurate as an SA80. So it depends if you really want a bullpup. Something like an EF88 is probably the way to go. And I really would need a crystal ball to take that one any further. I'm gonna pick one here actually, if that's okay. Cause
yeah, go for it.
That's this is getting into the politics, which I'm surprised we haven't got into more. But do you think giving the SA80 over to H&K to fix/finish, I like that choice. Yeah, they really did finish it quite right.
Yeah,
was the right choice, or do you think choosing a new rifle altogether again would have been a better option? Well, we'd have a shorter, less interesting book. And to be fair, I don't think servicewomen, perhaps as well, I don't think they would have had I don't think they got a worse gun. I think that the gun they ended up with is perfectly adequate. I don't think any lives would have been lost as a result of it. So I think I'm safe on safe ground there. But if it was me in the government procurement department, I'd have bought M16A2s. You know, that we already had them classified, had them in the inventory. We could have just bought a load more M16A2s and just gone, we're done. And then we could have upgraded them in an incremental way, like everyone else that's bought ARs has done.
In retrospect,
and we'd have been in a much better position.
Yeah, in retrospect, it would have saved a lot of money and heartache.
A lot of money. Yeah, I've done the sums, as I'm sure some other people have as well, of how many times we've paid for SA80 and how much it's cost. And yeah, should have bought A2. And when I say A2s, I don't mean the USGI A2. I mean the 715, model 715. So A1 sights, full auto. Now SF actually had both versions.
Okay.
Am I allowed to say that? Well, there we go.
Uh-oh, too late now. You went and did.
Old hat now. They wouldn't have used those for years. But yeah, so like the Canadians, they went with full auto and A1 field type sight. So I thought that was an excellent question. Okay. And we had another mention there of, because we talked a lot about SA80 and EM2 because they're the kind of obvious go-tos. Is there a bullpup in the book that's underappreciated? Well, I think for sheer wackiness and how seriously it was taken, the Thorneycroft really is fascinating. And does deserve people's attention. And I'll throw one other in there as well, which doesn't get a huge amount of exposure because we don't know much about it. But there is the very first bullpup from the mid-19th century. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to say about that. But.
Well, we already posted the video on the Curtis a couple weeks ago, if that's what you're referring to.
I'm actually thinking of the other one, which was made by a gunmaker called Riviere.
Okay.
And we're not even sure quite which one, whether it was father or son. And that could be as early as 1850-ish. And it's a muzzle-loading bullpup.
Okay. I know you referenced that one, but I honestly don't know anything about that one.
Yeah. Well, it's one of these where when you start to try and look for the earliest of something, you start stretching the definition. So I'm sure some people would say, if it's muzzle loading, can it be a bullpup? But it has the full-length barrel set back into the action. It qualifies by the definition I had to invent to actually make sense of what a bullpup is. Because this is something that the trials research really proves, is that people don't look at, we're going to procure a bullpup, we're going to procure a conventional rifle. They look at the merits across the piece.
Okay.
And whether it's bullpup or not is just one factor.
That's how they ought to do it.
Yeah, and they mostly seem to. I guess the Colonel Studler doing his thing is a good example of subverting that. But
yeah. All right, let's see. What else do we have? Bullpup rifles for specialist applications, like anti-materiel rifles. That's an interesting comment, in that that's a place where barrel length really could, there are real arguments to be made about whether a full-length barrel really matters today. when we're talking about lots of guys running around with 12.5
Yep.
inch or 14-inch barrels, and that's just fine. But an anti-material rifle where muzzle energy really kind of is a thing, I don't know how many of them are out there. Some bolt actions probably more than anything else.
Yeah, they tend to be bolt action. So you've got Gepards, you've got Barrett M95, which is a bolt action as well.
I think so, yeah.
And therefore UK legal, at least for the time being. God, and then my mind has gone blank. But yes,
we're at the last 5 minutes.
Really, the only existing argument for why a bullpup, other than like niche, like people who are constantly kicking indoors as their primary activity, might want a super short weapon, and then they can get that 12-inch barrel in an even shorter package. So there'll always be a niche application for that, for bullpups in that sense, I think, because you'll always need some degree of powder burn in a barrel.
Right.
Having said that, as you've alluded to, provided you can match the cartridge or the load to that barrel length, that's no longer a concern. So obviously a 12-inch barrel and 5.56 is, but in a cartridge that's designed for a 12-inch barrel, why is that a problem? Why would you want a bullpup? So the AMR thing is a very good point. You typically are going to need, for something like 50 BMG, 12.7 by 108, you're going to need a predetermined length of barrel. And I haven't done enough research on things like the M95 to know. Sorry, not the M95, but the Barrett CQ, which I believe does stand for close quarters, that's a fascinating idea, a close quarters Barrett. But actually, what that's really for is what you're talking about. So center of gravity, compact length for carrying in the field, a compact anti-materiel rifle for actual anti-materiel use at medium range, so some degree of precision, payload, explosive bullet, something like that, maybe for EOD, taking out radar dishes, whatever. Short barrel's not a problem. If you're having to carry those shots out to longer ranges, you might need the full-length barrel. So yeah, there'll always be a niche application for CQB, and I think there'll always be a niche application for AMRs, but then we haven't seen that exploited to perhaps the degree you would think. Okay. Is that just because the Barrett, the M107 is just so good? Don't know. There's some Russian efforts along those lines, I believe, as well, but I'm starting to blank.
I'm going to interrupt you briefly here. Anyone who still wants a pre-order book, you have 2 minutes left. That's it. So, and boy, it is really going to come down to the wire, because we're at 578, and we need, I think it was 580,900 to take the 10th place. So it could happen, but it's literally going to be a last-second thing. So there was one more question that came in that I saw that sounds, maybe this may not be something you can come up with a good answer to off the cuff this late in, but they were asking, like, what's a particularly funny or unusual or interesting way that the armories have acquired something? Are there any really good stories that come to mind about where you got something? It's not so much the gun as the acquisition story. Yeah,
there are probably lots. The one that's leapt to mind is that one of my colleagues, this is well before my time, found a wheel lock pistol, and I must work out which one this is. He knows this. I haven't. I must go and check. In a dumpster. I literally just thrown in a skip.
I would like to find a wheel lock in a dumpster.
Look in that particular dumpster, but they did, and they pulled out this amazing inlaid 17th century wheel lock pistol.
Wow. And he gave it to the armories.
Well, it was my colleague who pulled it out of the skip. So, I see what you mean. Right? Yeah. Well, there's a sort of unspoken thing that you don't collect for yourself, and I think he was. They were. It wasn't coincidence. They were there for that collecting activity, and it's just someone had already thrown this thing out. God knows
why. Yes, I was just dumpster diving. I found this 17th century inlaid wheel lock. As one does.
A difficult one to stick down the back of his pants. I don't know.
That's, you know what? The other one that I heard from you, and you can tell me if I'm misremembering this story, was the Ehrlichen gun that you have. that, as I recall the story, was basically offered to anyone who wanted it because it was deactivated and it was a non-gun. And someone from the armory showed up and went, "That's not deactivated. Those slots in the barrel are cooling vents. That's a live Ehrlichen gun."
I will admit, I don't know that story.
I heard that from someone at the armories, and I hope I'm remembering it correctly.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are. Yeah. I can well believe that.
It was apparently like a naval base that was shutting down, or a Coast Guard installation, or something.
Oh yeah. No, I know the one. I know the one you mean. Yeah. So that's correct, but it wouldn't, because they were a naval base. Unless they. No, see, it wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered to them or to us if it was live. But they did think it was an instructional.
Yeah.
Gun. In fairness, not just because the barrel shrouds cut away, which they were, but because it had been painted red on the inside, which is typically a skeletonized instructional thing.
Easy
and
mistake
it was at a training facility. So.
All right, our Kickstarter has now officially ended. We are at 579,440.
Oh.
So we are still number 11 by the tiniest of margins, but that is really a truly phenomenal outpouring of support and interest from the community. Frankly, every time I talk to someone else who's in publishing related to firearms, and I tell them how Chassepot de FAMAS did, they basically don't believe me, and it's fantastic to see basically the same level of response to your book, because what it means is we really do have a broad base of interest in good, modern, gorgeously photographed firearms reference books. It's not just because I'm some dude with a YouTube channel and everyone wants my book. It is people actually really want good information presented well about these guns. So congratulations, Jonathan. That's no one in the public industry will believe you either now.
Yeah, probably including Osprey. I've also written a book for, and probably not my colleagues either. Thank you. I really appreciate that coming from you, and all the support coming from everyone else. It's literally unbelievable.
It's fantastic. I love it. So, and we look forward to doing many, many more. So.
And I look forward to reading them instead of writing them.
I know. It's kind of a lot of work, isn't it? And you're not done yet, because you still have to go through and help us do the layout and, stop writing at some point.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. It's not over yet. I don't want it to be either. It's great. Every time I think it's been a bit overwhelming, the next day it's been great again. So it's been a really good process. I had a hot tip as to the Russian AMR I couldn't remember. ASVK/KSVK, of course.
Okay.
Which does get a mention in the book, but
cool.
which I know very little about, and we don't have, unfortunately.
All right.
And I think the only one we missed, of the ones that I can see, was Apocalypse Scenario. What's your favorite rifle, pistol, and alcoholic beverage to accompany you into the wasteland? And as I plan to do a rewatch of Fury Road whenever I wake up tomorrow, that's quite apt. In fact, that's because I managed to get this for
nice. That's
not very
cool.
much money recently. So anyway, you go first, Ian.
Oh, Apocalypse rifle, pistol, and alcoholic beverage?
Yeah, you may have done this before. I don't know.
See, the problem is I'm going to have to go with, because I can't say left-handed EM2 Commando, I have to go with something that's actually practical. And it's kind of maybe a boring choice, but it's my What Would Stoner Do carbine.
Right.
It's a 14.5-inch barreled, very lightweight AR with a good red dot sighting system. The balance is phenomenal. It weighs next to nothing. And it is my one go-to do anything carbine. Pistol would be basically any modern pistol with a red dot on it. I consider them largely interchangeable. Glock, SIG, M17 or 320. there are a lot of other options, and they're all fine. And then alcoholic beverage, I think, would be Lagavulin 16. That is my very favorite Scotch.
Fair enough. Which has given me time to think, and unfortunately my answer is going to be quite boring as well, because I take my apocalyptic scenarios very seriously. And that's going to have to be a machined receiver AK of some description.
Okay.
For all of the obvious reasons.
They're all good. I don't think anyone made a milled AK that was not quite good.
I'm sure if the Brits had made one, we'd probably have some stiff competition, but
Fortunately, you didn't.
Actually, I'd quite like to see that attempted. Anyway, can we get Accuracy International to make an AK?
I'll slap you for saying so.
Yeah, probably. They probably should as well. I'm very tired. Glock 19, because obviously, and some sort of real ale, like a light ale, a pale ale, IPA, something like that, in a large keg. You know, like in Mad Max, where he has like the fuel tanks on the back of the Interceptor.
Yeah.
One of those, but beer.
Warm.
And the other one
presumably?
would be. Oh yeah, and I'd have the British Army tank tea brewing kit in there as well.
All right. That's a good setup. I can't argue with that one.
Yeah. I'm still thinking about that idealized bullpup question. I feel like I need to give that more thought.
Oh God, it's going to be the appendix in the book now. He's not done writing.
It's just, you know, I'm British, so we're cursed to constantly revisit the bullpup, aren't we? Seemingly.
Apparently, yeah. All right. By the way, we bumped up. I think we got one more order that finalized after the Kickstarter formally ended. So it's 579, 585. So still missed it by the skin of our teeth, but a phenomenal outreach. And
we've got to be happy with that, haven't we?
So
Thanks, everybody.
I think I can safely speak for Jonathan when I say we're very excited to get books printed and sent to all of you guys. You'll love this one as well, and we've got lots more coming after it. So thank you all very much. I'm sure, Jonathan, you're ready. You're over there. You're ready to get some sleep at long last. I think you've more than earned it. So
I am, yes.
Thank you for staying up until 3 a.m. to do this with us.
10 past 5 a.m.
Now, yes. Yeah, I expected you were going to get up early. I didn't think you'd be crazy enough to just stay up.
Yeah. I've been up since, admittedly I got up late this morning, but
yesterday morning.
Sorry, yesterday morning.
I'm too much of an old man. I can't pull that off. No. All right, guys, we are going to close this out. Thank you all once again. And if you have purchased a copy of the book, you'll be getting backer updates. There is some behind-the-scenes video that will be coming to you guys, as well as periodic updates on the status of the book, just to keep you informed. So thank you again, and have a good night.